Sarah, an 18-year-old girl, thought my family was absolutely rock solid for most of my life. Just me, my mom, AmITheA, 46, and my dad, James, 48. Yes, like every family, we experienced ups and downs, but we always seemed close. So I thought, about 2 years ago, when I was 16, things began to fall apart. The marriage of my parents was already strained, primarily due to financial difficulties. Dad lost his job, and the tension from unpaid payments became regular conflicts. They first tried to protect me from it, but soon every meal descended into a shouting contest. I wasn't very surprised when they eventually declared they were divorcing, but it still hurt. Dad left practically right away, and for a period, Mom and I were alone. Though I tried to keep everything as usual, home felt weighted. Mom started dating once more not long later. She married once more inside a year. David, her new husband, arrived with Caitlyn, a 17-year-old daughter. Caitlyn was the sort of person that brightens a room. Mostly everything I'm not. Bubbly, gregarious, and charming. I assumed we might really get along when they first came in. Inviting her to hang out, I tried to connect with her, but she seemed to be always one step ahead. She seemed to have a natural fascination for people, and before I knew it, my mother was utterly fascinated by her. It started out with little things first. Mom would boast about Caitlyn's achievements over dinner, and now every family outing centered on her. Mom purchased me a sweeper and a cake on my last birthday. A few months later, Caitlyn's birthday arrived, and they shocked her with a car and threw her a great party. Not just any automobile either, but a brand new, shining one. Not even after I graduated, I had never gotten anything like it. Mom brushed it off when I tried to explain how I felt. She advised me to stop feeling envious and stated I was acting foolish. I stayed with that word, jealous. Was my jealousy evident? I never considered this. I just wanted to know I still mattered. I started spending more weekends at my dad's house at this time. I told him everything, and on my behalf he became enraged. He urged me to stand up for myself and reassured me that it wasn't entirely in my head. Still, it was challenging. David had begun to shape household operations. Though he constantly discussed how mixed households should function, it was obvious that Caitlyn was his first concern. In my own house, I felt like the odd one out. Family holidays started to cause misery. Caitlyn was the center of attention always, while I was more of an afterthought. Mom called off a vacation we had been saving for years, saying we cannot afford it one Christmas. Later on, I discovered that Caitlyn's extracurricular activities had been funded with the money. Still another slap in the face. For her part, Caitlyn wasn't exactly naive. She was naturally adept at using circumstances to her benefit. She would pretend to be the victim anywhere there was conflict, casting me as the cause. Starting to keep my distance, that simply made things worse. My mother appeared to cling to me more, the more I withdrew. One evening I heard Mom chatting to David and realized the breaking point. She was laughing and remarked something like, "I'm just so lucky to finally have the daughter I always wanted." I can't even really say what it felt like to hear that. I avoided immediately confronting her. I simply went to my room, packed a bag, and gave my dad a call. I had moved in with him formally by the end of the week. Looking back, I believe that was the turning point in everything. It transcended Caitlyn now as well. It was about learning my mother considered me not a top concern. Moving out was my method of regaining control, but I knew it was only starting a far more intense struggle. Moving in with Dad felt like entering another universe. He made it plain that his house was now my house and not only welcomed me with wide arms. Even locating some old pictures of us to display on the walls, he helped me arrange my room. Although it was consoling, there was not time to fully settle in. My choice set off quick effects. Mom's response arrived quite instantly. She contacted me incessantly, leaving voicemails accusing me of being unappreciative. She insisted on asking questions like, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" She was more concerned in making me feel bad for leaving than in knowing why I left. Caitlyn lost little time expressing her emotions either. She began sharing little digs on social media within days of me moving out. She posted a picture of her seated in the car Mom had bought her under the caption, "Guess I'm the only daughter now." Another group photo from a family dinner I wasn't invited to under the caption, "Family First." Not long after, mutual friends started spreading the rumors around the school. The division extended beyond the house. Extended relatives started to show sides as well. Some of them got in touch to let me know they knew why I left, and even said they had seen Mom treating Caitlyn differentially. Others, on the other hand, supported Mom, saying I was acting theatrically and should go back home to mend things. The whole family seemed to be getting pulled into this turmoil. Dad informed me he was restarting the divorce process, as if that weren't enough. Apparently, there were unresolved financial issues, and Mom's recent expenditure, particularly on Caitlyn, was raising questions. Dad chose to battle for some of the assets Mom had claimed since he wanted to be sure I would be taken care of. Mom tried one thing after another to get me back as well. She messaged me extensively on how much she missed me and on her want for things to return as they were. She never tackled the actual problems, though. It was always about how I was hurting her emotions, not about the partiality or the way she had ranked Caitlyn above me. Dad advised me to pursue therapy to help me go through everything. Honestly, it was a great idea. Many of what I was feeling may be untangled by talking to someone objective, but it also gave me the assurance to begin defending myself. I stopped responding to Mom's guilt-tripping notes and cut off the discussion when she mentioned Caitlyn. Caitlyn was not giving up her games, though. She started telling tales about how I had dropped our blended family at school as I couldn't handle sharing attention. Every hall I passed seemed to be humming with murmurs, as mutual friends were caught in the middle. But by then, I was beginning to see that my letting her manipulate only worked. I thus stopped participating, which appeared to irritate her even more. The court procedures added still another degree of drama. Dad's attorney was interested in my interpretation of events occurring at home. I let go without thinking twice. I discussed the canceled trip, the car, and even the overheard exchange whereby Mom had phoned Caitlyn, the daughter she had always wanted. Though it wasn't simple, it seemed required. Mom's fixation on Caitlyn grew very clear during all this. She never mentioned me, not once. She began uploading photos online with phrases like, "So proud of my beautiful girl," and "couldn't ask for a better daughter." Though it stung, it confirmed my choice to go. She was eliminating me, not only favoring Caitlyn. My rock through all of it was Dad. I deserved better, he insisted, and none of this was my fault. One of the best pieces of advice I have ever received comes from him also. He urged me to set limits with Mom. Mom confronting me in public set the breaking point. She arrived outside my university, insisting on speaking. She was loud enough to draw a gathering, and I could see everyone staring at us. She persisted in wondering why I was doing this to her, but I avoided the bait. When she could respect my boundaries, I gently told her I would be pleased to chat. Then I left it at that. Though it was difficult, leaving was the correct thing to do. I then stopped interacting with her totally. I warned her I would only reply to polite replies. Though it was a difficult position to adopt, it was the only one that would help me to preserve calm. Dad helped me every step of the way, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was beginning to take control of my life. Not long after I set those limits with Mom, she ceased getting in touch at all. She was avoiding me on purpose, which I assumed was her way of giving me space. She also ignored my kind notes on logistics, that is, on collecting up the rest of my stuff from the house. It was a complete shutdown, as though I had vanished from her existence. David, her spouse, was more chatty. He emailed me with passive hostility all over. He wrote about how my leaving had torn the family apart, and about how I had to grow up and appreciate the sacrifices Mom had made for me. The email was one large guilt trip. Dad encouraged me not to respond when he read it before I did, so I did not. Caitlyn, meanwhile, was having a field day. She focused especially on the rumors at the school, telling everyone who would listen that I had gone because I couldn't stand sharing attention. While some believed her, most did not. My closest friends stayed with me, and a few even started criticizing her actions. That didn't stop her either, though. She appeared to savor the drama and the attention it attracted. Dad's legal team was poring over Mom and David's records as all of this was occurring. They found some quite interesting information about Mom's usage of marital assets to fund David's failing company and pay Caitlyn's car bills. The child support money was being used differently as well. Dad was enraged, but instead of reacting immediately, he let his attorney manage it. Mom chose, on the other hand, to bring her complaints to social media. She shared a lengthy, moving piece about the difficulties of being a mother and the thanklessness of children. She did not specifically mention me, but everyone who understood our circumstances could understand she was referring to me. I noticed the post and rolled my eyes when some of her pals remarked things like, "Stay strong, Mama," and "Kids don't understand what we go through for them." It was only another means for her to act the victim. For all the drama, my friends were my rock. They constantly remind me not to let Mom or Caitlyn's antics get to me and to pay attention to myself. Their help, along with Dad's, made a big difference. I continued attending therapy as well, which let me see Mom's behavior reflected more of her own fears than of anything I had done. Though it wasn't an excuse, it clarified certain things. Next was Caitlyn's birthday. Mom threw a quite extravagant celebration, akin to overdone. There was a professional photographer, food catered, and a DJ. I shined when I saw the photographs online. Not to compare it to my last birthday, which had been a nice meal only with Mom and David, was difficult. One could hardly overlook the obvious partiality. Dad shared his marriage to Mom during one of our late-night conversations. He shared with me her constant need for approval and how her fears sometimes drove her to overcompensate in ways that harmed others around her. Though it didn't absolve what she had done, hearing his point of view enabled me to somewhat better understand her. Caitlyn's mask began to slide in class. She mentioned in passing in a chat with some common friends that she loved being the favorite since it gave her power in the family. Someone recorded it. The clip traveled about. It made her look terrible, but it did not totally set them against her. I started working part-time in a nearby bookshop about this time. Though it wasn't glitzy, it offered me a sense of freedom I hadn't had recently. Making my own money was liberating and kept me occupied enough to prevent obsessing about family strife. Neither was the wider family keeping silent. Finally facing Mom, one of my aunts, who had been essentially impartial up until now, confronted her. She advised her to give her treatment to me some serious thought. Mom found it objectionable. My aunt said she doubled down and insisted I was the cause. Mom's desperation hit a fresh low when she tried to buy me pricey gifts. She missed me and sent a box to Dad's place including a luxury bag and a letter. I returned the package without opening it. Dad said he was pleased with me for being firm. The pivotal point in the legal matter was that Dad's lawyer showed proof of financial misbehavior, and the court decided in his advantage. Mom was directed to reimburse some of the money she had used, and he gained more authority over the surviving assets. Though it wasn't a total triumph, it was a positive start. I kept rigid in my limits through it all. Mom's attempts to guilt me or control me had lost their potency. I wasn't trying to change her thinking or seeking her approval. I felt at last free to concentrate on myself and my future for the first time in years. At last, the court fight came to an end, and Dad emerged triumphant. The court backed him, giving him partial custody rights over the remaining joint assets and additional financial stability. For both of us, it was much needed. The verdict revealed Mom's financial misbehavior covering Caitlyn's automobile, extracurricular activities, and even David's growing debt. Though the specifics were ugly, they were required to support Dad's case. Mom naturally didn't take it well. She screamed, charging me with enabling Dad to humiliate her. She claimed in a long, furious email that I had split apart the family and damaged her reputation. Not much I could say to that would apply. She seemed more offended about being discovered than about the results of her activities. The court records also made it quite evident how much she had spent for Caitlyn specifically. Seeing it presented in black and white caused me to experience both melancholy and vindication. It was about years of choices that revealed her actual priorities, not only about the car or the parties. A few of my relatives in extended family cannot ignore it anymore. Others still argued, nevertheless, that I was the one in mistake. With aunts and cousins choosing sides, the family's division grew more clear-cut. Popularity of Caitlyn suffered as well. Friends and even some relatives began to see through her manipulation. Her boasting about being the preferred video clip was still under circulation, and the court revelations just served to fan the flames. Once lovely people were now keeping their distance from her. She managed poorly, and it began to show. One of my aunts contacted me. She had remained objective during most of the turmoil. She related personal tales about Mom's favoritism and how it had strained their growing-up relationship. Her point of view helped me to see that this was more than just my business. Long before Caitlyn and I were in the scene, Mom's habits had been hurting others. Dad's unwavering support and my friends' help let me begin to rebuild. My network seemed better than it had ever been. When times were hard, I turned to my friends. They were always there to assure me that I was making the best decisions for me. Along with picking up some new interests like painting, I kept occupied at the bookshop working. Therapy also benefited. I started to shed the guilt I had been feeling since I left Mom's place gradually but definitely. On her side, though, things were not calm. She wrote me an email ultimatum. Either she would write me out of her life or apologize and return home. Her last play to get control backfired instead. I chose to emphasize keeping my limits instead of answering. Dad was pleased with me for being tenacious. All the confirmation I needed came from that. One day, Caitlyn cornered me in the corridor, accusing me of destroying their family and trying to create drama at the school. She was loud enough to get attention, yet her tantrum backfired rather than embarrassing me. A few of the students even intervened to protect me, advising her to go alone. Watching her storm off felt strange. She was at last paying for her deeds. David's financial problems were catching up with him in the meantime. His company was collapsing and creditors were closing in. Although Mom's house was strained, I didn't feel bad for them. They had chosen, and now they were dealing with the consequences. Dad kept me grounded throughout. He urged me to concentrate on my studies and aspirations instead of dragging me back into the drama, and reminded me that I had a great future. His relentless encouragement gave me the confidence to assume leadership positions at the company and at the university. I joined the student council and began operating a book club right out of the business. I felt like I was flourishing for the first time in a very long time. Dad and my buddies threw me a subdued celebration when my birthday arrived around. Though it was little, just a baked cake, some thoughtful presents, it meant everything to me. Lots of laughter was involved. Perched there among the folks who really loved me, I couldn't help but consider my progress. I wasn't the same person who left Mom's house in tears after packing a bag. At last, at peace with my choice, I was stronger, more independent. Though the road ahead felt unknown, for the first time I was not terrified. That was enough. I knew I had the tools I needed to keep on. Mom went absolutely quiet following the disorganized dinner. Not emails, not calls, not anything. It nearly felt like something else. Not once in months was there a single communication criticizing me for something or trying to guilt me into returning. Though the calm was disturbing, she seemed to have given up. Caitlyn's life wasn't going much better. Her tendency toward manipulation had caught up with her at last. Friends in the classroom stopped interacting with her, and even some of her most ardent supporters among the extended family cut off contact. Her reputation was in ruins as the tales of her actions at the dinner went around. The loneliness must have been intolerable for someone who lived on attention, but I wasn't going to let her pull me back into her drama. David had financial problems at their worst. At last, his debt caught up with him, and one of his creditors sued him. Their house suffered greatly from the case, and the extravagant lifestyle they had been striving to keep fell apart. Caitlyn's special surprises and extravagant birthday parties were gone. From what I knew via mutual friends, their house was tight, but I had no desire to get involved. Dad started seeing someone else new about the same time. Claire was her name. She was actually rather friendly. She was always supportive and motivating, even though she tried not to act like a replacement mother or overreach. Sometimes she came to supper with us and tried to get to know me without probing into the drama. It was a good change, and Dad obviously delightedly. By means of therapy, I at last let go of the grudge I had been carrying toward Mom. Though it released me from the continual weight of resentment, forgiveness did not mean I was ready to reconcile. I understood I could not make her see things my way or change her, but I could go ahead without letting her behavior define me. My primary concentration turned to school, and the work paid off. For academic brilliance, I obtained a scholarship. For several of my projects, my lecturers acknowledged me. Seeing my diligence pay off made sense. Dad was ecstatic. Claire made me a cake to mark the occasion. I felt as though I was creating something good for my future, first in a very long time. Then, out of the blue, my aunt called. Mom was in the hospital after a little health scare. Though it wasn't severe, it shook her sufficiently. After some deliberation, I agreed to see my aunt as advised. Approaching her hospital room seemed strange. She seemed startled to see me but said little. I took a seat, and we had a nice, quick discussion on her situation and emotional state. Though it wasn't nasty either, the reunion was not heartwarming. I wasn't surprised when Caitlyn vanished from sight. From what I had heard, she had started to distance herself from everyone and had become more bitter about my absence. Caitlyn hardly noticed me when I visited the house later to drop some things off for Mom. She seemed icy and detached, as though she couldn't decide whether to pick a fight or ignore me. Neither of these appealed to me. Mom and I had an honest talk before leaving the hospital. I told her I loved her, but things would have to alter if any true relationship could survive. Respect, limits, and no more favoritism were just what I needed. She nodded along and even said she had made mistakes, but she wasn't ready to own them. Though not enough to close the distance between us, she seemed to be trying. Dad provided me some advice that stayed with me when I informed him about the conversation. He reminded me that it was good to know not all relationships could be healed, that I had tried mattered most. Mom changed. I had no control over it, but I could influence my movement forward. A few months later, I started college. Though it was sad to be packing and bidding farewell to Dad and Claire, I was thrilled about the new beginning. I knew how far I had come when I moved into my apartment and started classes. The poisonous surroundings I grew up in no longer held sway over me. I could then concentrate on my future and the life I intended to create. Looking back, the encounter helped me to see the need for limits and self-respect. Though it was difficult, standing up for myself was well worth it. To anyone in a like circumstance, my advice is straightforward. Give yourself top priority. Other individuals cannot be changed, but you can choose to guard your own serenity. Though it's not always easy, occasionally walking away is the only way to really advance. Story 2. I never thought I'd be sitting here, recounting this story. But my life has taken a turn I could never have anticipated. My wife, Sarah, just gambled away our house. We've been married for 8 years, and during that time I thought we had a stable, if not exciting, life. We paid our bills, planned for the future, and managed the daily grind. But it turns out, that wasn't the whole picture. There was something happening behind the scenes, something I was completely oblivious to. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an ordinary envelope. I was sorting through the usual pile of mail, mostly junk with a few bills sprinkled in, when I noticed a letter from our mortgage lender. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe they'd made a mistake, or perhaps it was just a routine notice. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It wasn't routine at all. The letter was a formal notice informing us that we were 3 months behind on our mortgage payments. 3 months? That couldn't be right. I checked our bank account, and sure enough, the last mortgage payment had gone through over 90 days ago. I was confused. We had enough money in the account to cover it, or at least I thought we did. I immediately called the bank, and the representative confirmed what I'd already seen. No payments had been made for the last 3 months. My confusion quickly morphed into suspicion. I knew I hadn't missed any payments, so I started to wonder if someone had tampered with our account. As I hung up the phone, the full reality of the situation began to sink in. I started reviewing our account history, and that's when I noticed it. Several large withdrawals over the past few months. They weren't for groceries, bills, or any significant household expenses. The amounts ranged from a few hundred to a few $1,000s, all disappearing in one go. The pattern was undeniable. Something was draining our savings fast. The more I looked, the clearer it became. Sarah had been quietly withdrawing money, but not for anything normal or necessary. The money was going to online gambling sites, places I didn't even know she had access to. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe her account had been hacked, or perhaps there was some kind of fraud going on. But as I kept digging, it became impossible to ignore the truth. The gambling transactions were all linked to her personal account. The missing money, the gaps in our savings, it all pointed back to her, and the mortgage was just the tip of the iceberg. That night I confronted her. It wasn't the explosive screaming match you might expect. It started quietly, with me laying out what I'd found. At first, she acted like she didn't know what I was talking about. She claimed it must be a mistake, some kind of error with the bank, but I wasn't buying it. I pressed her, showing her the withdrawals, the gambling sites. That's when her defenses started to crumble. She admitted she'd been gambling, but she tried to downplay it, like it wasn't a big deal. "It's just a hobby," she said, "something to pass the time." She made it sound like she was spending a few bucks here and there for fun. But that didn't explain why our mortgage hadn't been paid, why our savings had been drained, or why there were thousands of dollars unaccounted for. As I kept pushing, she finally revealed more. It wasn't just a small habit. She'd been gambling online for months, hoping to win big and fix everything. She said it started small, but as time went on, she began betting more, convinced she could turn it around. But instead of winning, she kept losing. And every time she lost, she doubled down, hoping to make it back. That's how she gambled away our house. It was surreal hearing her say those words out loud. She hadn't meant to, she said. She thought she could win enough to cover the mortgage, but instead she dug us deeper into a hole. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to process it all. How could she have kept this from me for so long? Why hadn't she told me when things started getting out of control? The more I thought about it, the more the little things started to make sense. Her staying up late, the unexplained absences, the times she seemed distant or preoccupied, it was all connected, and I hadn't seen it until it was too late. But that wasn't even the worst part. As we talked, she finally admitted something else. It wasn't just the house. There was more debt. A lot more. Credit cards, personal loans, even some payday loans I didn't know about. The numbers she threw out were staggering. Our entire financial situation was crumbling, and I hadn't realized it until that moment. I asked her why she hadn't told me sooner, why she let it get this bad. Her response was vague, something about being afraid, about not wanting to disappoint me, but that didn't make it any better. It didn't change the fact that we were now on the edge of financial ruin, all because she'd hidden this massive problem from me. We didn't resolve anything that night. She didn't offer any real solutions, just more excuses. I didn't know what to do, and honestly, I still don't. The damage is done, and now I'm left trying to figure out how to salvage what's left of our lives. But as bad as things are, there's still this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that we're not even close to rock bottom yet. I've barely scratched the surface of what she's done, and I'm terrified of what else I might find. Because if she's willing to gamble away our house, what else has she been hiding? And that's the part that scares me the most. It's not just the house, it's everything. Part 2. After that first night, when Sarah admitted to gambling away the house, I knew I needed to dig deeper. Something told me this wasn't the full story. There had to be more. So the next morning, I sat down with my laptop and started going through everything, line by line. The mortgage issue had been bad enough, but it quickly became clear that our financial problems were far more extensive. Credit cards I didn't even know we had were maxed out. I'm talking balances in the tens of thousands of dollars. And they weren't just in her name either. They were in both of ours. Loans I had never agreed to had been taken out in our names as well. Payday loans, personal loans, anything she could get her hands on. It was like staring into a black hole of debt, and it was swallowing everything. As I pieced through the transactions, I could see how it all happened. There were hundreds of small purchases, sometimes just $20, sometimes $100, on gambling apps and online casinos. It wasn't just one platform either. It was dozens. Then there were the bigger charges. $500 here, $1,000 there. She had been trying to win back the money she lost, over and over again, but every time, it just got worse. And now, we were on the verge of losing everything. What really shook me was how far this had reached. I thought the mortgage was the biggest problem, but I was wrong. Our savings were completely gone, wiped out. The small cushion we had set aside for emergencies had been used up months ago. I hadn't even noticed because she had been moving money around, making it seem like everything was still fine. But it wasn't. It hadn't been for a long time. As I dug deeper, I realized we weren't just talking about our accounts. She had also borrowed money from her family, thousands of dollars. I found out when I called her brother, desperate for answers. He sounded awkward on the phone, like he'd been dreading this conversation. That's when he told me she'd borrowed money from him, her parents, and even a few of her friends. In total, It was more than I could have imagined, more than I knew how to deal with. Her family had no idea what she was using the money for. She told them it was for home repairs, medical bills, anything but the truth. But now that they knew what was really going on, they were furious. I couldn't blame them. As the day went on, I felt like everything was crashing down around me. Every plan we had for the future, buying a new car, saving for a vacation, putting aside money for emergencies, was now impossible. Our future was crumbling, and all I could do was watch. The weight of our financial ruin was becoming overwhelming, and I wasn't sure how we were going to get out of it. I tried talking to her again that night. I laid out everything I had found, the loans, the credit cards, the money she borrowed from family. She sat there quiet, looking down at her hands. When she finally spoke, it was the same story as before. She didn't mean for it to get this bad. She thought she could fix it. She was just trying to win enough to make things right. But there was no making this right. We were in too deep. I told her we had to stop, that I was going to freeze the accounts, talk to a lawyer, and figure out how to salvage what was left of our financial lives. Her reaction was mixed. On one hand, she agreed. There was no denying how bad things had gotten. But on the other hand, she still seemed to think there was a way out, like one big win could somehow fix everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing, going over all the ways our life was falling apart. I started thinking about what would happen next. Would we have to sell everything? Would we lose the car, our savings, and any chance of retirement? How could I ever trust her again after this? The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't know much about this sort of thing, but I knew we needed professional help. Someone who could help us freeze accounts, protect what little we had left, and keep Sarah from making things worse. The lawyer told me we could look into separating our finances legally, but it wouldn't be easy. We were so deeply tied together in debt that untangling everything could take months or even years. Still, it was a step I had to take. I also called the bank and froze our joint accounts. I was trying to stop the bleeding, but it felt like too little, too late. Every call I made, every piece of advice I received, seemed to confirm what I already knew. We were in serious trouble, and there was no quick fix. But then, that night, things got even worse. When I came home, Sarah wasn't there. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she went out for groceries or just needed some space. But as the hours went by, I started to get worried. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted her, but there was no response. It wasn't like her to just disappear without saying something. By the next morning, I still hadn't heard from her. That's when I really started to panic. I had no idea where she was, what she was doing, or if she was safe. My mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Had she run off to gamble again? Was she trying to fix things on her own, making everything worse? I didn't know what to think. I tried calling her family, but they hadn't heard from her either. I was left sitting at home, staring at my phone, wondering where she was and what was going to happen next. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I had no idea how to stop it.